This is number 10 on our list. The Sentinelese, a tribe so isolated they've resisted all contact into the modern age. Picture an emerald island rising out of the Indian Ocean. Its dense jungle hiding mysteries that outsiders have never uncovered. This is North Sentinel Island, part of India's Andaman chain. Its people, the Sentinelese, live as they have for thousands of years, untouched by modern technology, protected by both geography and their own fierce resistance to contact. Helicopters flying overhead after the 2004 tsunami were met with volleys of arrows. Boats drifting too close to the shoreline have been driven away with spears. Even in the age of satellites and smartphones, here is a society that remains uncontacted, uncolonized, and entirely apart. The Sentinelese population is small, estimated at anywhere from 50 to perhaps 200 individuals. They survive as hunter-gatherers, fishing in the shallows, hunting wild pigs and birds, and gathering fruits and tubers from the island's thick forests. They fashion bows and arrows from local wood, spears hardened in fire, and canoes capable of navigating the lagoon's calm waters, but not the open sea. Their life is built around sustainability, taking only what the island offers and nothing more. Their language is unknown to outsiders, and their rituals, social structure, and beliefs remain mysteries. What we do know comes only from distant observation or rare contact attempts that ended quickly. Those attempts to reach them have almost always failed. In the late 19th century, British colonial forces kidnapped a small group of Sentinelese in a misguided study. The older captives quickly died of disease, and the surviving children were hastily returned. The tribe's violent rejection of outsiders since may well stem from such traumatic encounters. During the 1970s and 1980s, Indian anthropologists tried to establish contact by leaving coconuts, bananas, and metal tools on the beaches. At times, small groups of Sentinelese would approach to collect them. But these exchanges never lasted, and often ended with arrows fired at the visitors' boats. That hostility is not irrational. History shows what happened when other Andaman tribes were forced into contact. The Great Andamanese, once thousands strong, were decimated by smallpox, measles, and tuberculosis after British colonization. Their numbers collapsed to a few dozen survivors. The Anjan Jawa tribes suffered similar fates. The Sentinelese may know nothing of microbes or immunology, but instinctively they seem to understand that outsiders bring sickness, disruption, and death. Their island is their sanctuary, and their isolation is their shield. In modern times, this fierce defense has continued. In 2006, 2 fishermen who drifted too close while illegally harvesting crabs were killed. Their bodies left on the beach. Indian Coast Guard helicopters sent to retrieve them were driven back by arrows. In 2018, an American missionary named John Allen Cho secretly attempted to land on North Sentinel to convert the islanders to Christianity. Within hours, he was dead. These incidents shocked global headlines, but for the Sentinelese, they were simply acts of protection. To them, survival depends on keeping the outside world out. Recognizing the dangers, the Indian government has made North Sentinel Island strictly off-limits. No outsiders may land, and approaching within several nautical miles is prohibited by law. This is as much to protect curious visitors from harm as it is to shield the Sentinelese from devastating exposure to disease. The policy is unique. Rather than trying to assimilate or convert, India enforces their isolation, preserving one of the last truly uncontacted peoples on Earth. From a legal standpoint, the Sentinelese may be the most heavily protected tribe in the world, despite their tiny size. Looking at North Sentinel from above, it's hard not to feel a mix of awe and unease. The Sentinelese stand as a mirror to our own modern lives. We are wired, connected, and exposed, while they remain hidden, private, and unyielding. In their rejection of the outside world, they've preserved a way of life that to us feels impossibly distant. Yet they are here, alive, defending their beaches with bow and arrow against the encroachment of drones, helicopters, and satellites. And so, the Sentinelese claim their place on this list not as relics of the past, but as living proof that even now, parts of humanity remain utterly beyond our reach. This is number 9 on our list, the Maori. A people whose warrior traditions shocked Europeans, and whose culture still thrives today. When European explorers first sailed into New Zealand in the 17th century, they encountered not just a land of breathtaking mountains and fjords, but a people unlike any they had ever met. The Maori were Polynesian voyagers who had settled the islands centuries earlier, navigating thousands of miles of open ocean in massive double-hulled canoes called waka. They brought with them agricultural knowledge, oral traditions, and a social structure deeply tied to kinship. Over time, they forged a culture marked by artistry, spirituality, and ferocity in battle. What stunned Europeans most were the Maori's warrior traditions. Before combat, groups would perform the haka, a fearsome war dance combining thunderous stomping, rhythmic chants, bulging eyes, and tongues thrust outward. The haka was more than intimidation, it was a declaration of unity, strength, and connection to ancestors. To outsiders, it looked terrifying, but to the Maori, it was spiritual, binding the group together before blood was shed. Warriors decorated their bodies with intricate moko tattoos, carved into the skin, each line a record of lineage, achievements, and monospiritual authority. The Maori excelled in building fortified villages called pi, designed with ditches, palisades, and terraces that turned hilltops into near-impregnable strongholds. Their weapons, crafted from wood, stone, and bone, were wielded with terrifying skill. The taiaha, a long wooden staff with a carved striking end, was used with fluid, dance-like movements. The mere, a short club carved from greenstone, could shatter bone with a single blow. In close combat, Maori warriors fought with ferocity that shocked even seasoned European soldiers. When Captain James Cook first landed in New Zealand in 1769, violent clashes erupted almost immediately. Cultural misunderstandings, combined with the Maori's defense of their land, led to bloodshed. Over the next century, European colonization pushed deeper, sparking the New Zealand Wars of the 19th century. The British, with muskets and cannons, expected easy victory. Instead, they faced a guerrilla war unlike any they had fought before. Maori leaders, such as Hone, Heka, and Te Kuti, used innovative tactics, ambushes, and fortified pi that absorbed artillery fire. In many battles, British forces suffered heavy losses at the hands of warriors, armed with little more than spears and muskets they had traded for. But the Maori story isn't just one of warfare. Their culture is rich with art, song, and oral history. Carved meeting houses, or wera-nui, are adorned with figures of ancestors, each telling a story across generations. Their navigation skills rivaled any in the ancient world, using stars, currents, and bird patterns to cross vast oceans long before Europeans carried compasses. Their myths speak of Maui, a trickster hero who fished islands from the sea and slowed the sun with his rope. These stories kept their identity alive, even through the hardships of colonization. The arrival of Europeans brought devastating consequences. Diseases ravaged Maori populations, cutting their numbers by more than half within a century. Land was confiscated or forcibly purchased, leaving many tribes dispossessed. Missionaries condemned traditional beliefs and practices, branding them pagan. Yet, despite these pressures, the Maori endured. They adapted, fought legal battles, and preserved their traditions in the face of overwhelming change. The Treaty of Waitangi, signed in 1840, was meant to guarantee rights and protection, but became a source of conflict when the English and Maori versions diverged in meaning. Its legacy is still debated today, a reminder of the deep scars left by colonization. Today, the Maori make up about 17% of New Zealand's population, and their influence is woven into the nation's identity. The haka is performed not only on rugby fields by the All Blacks, but in ceremonies, weddings, and funerals as a living cultural expression. Moko tattoos have seen revival, not as relics, but as proud declarations of heritage. The Maori language, once suppressed, is now taught in schools and spoken in Parliament. Far from fading, Maori culture is experiencing a resurgence, reclaiming its place at the heart of New Zealand's story. To watch a haka is to feel its power chest pounding, voices raised in defiance, eyes blazing. It connects warriors past and present, carrying a cultural memory that has never been extinguished. The Maori may have shocked Europeans with their ferocity centuries ago, but today they inspire the world with their resilience, artistry, and strength. And so, the Maori take their place on this list, not just as warriors of legend, but as a people whose culture has endured against colonization and time. This is number 8 on our list, the Scythian. Horse-riding nomads, known for tattoos, wild rituals, and drinking from enemy skulls. Stretching across the vast Eurasian steppe from the Black Sea to Central Asia, the Scythians appeared in history around the 9th century BCE. They were a people without cities or stone monuments, yet their culture and reputation thundered across the ancient world. Greek writers like Herodotus described them with equal parts awe and horror. Fierce warriors, superb horsemen, and masters of archery. To settled empires, the Scythians seemed untamed, living beyond the reach of kings and laws. Their world was the open steppe-rolling grasslands without borders. On horseback, they moved with their herds of cattle and horses, living in wagons covered with felt, portable and practical. The horse was central to their existence, transportation, status, and war machine all in one. Scythian riders were some of the earliest to perfect mounted archery, firing deadly arrows with astonishing accuracy while galloping at full speed. Armies that relied on heavy infantry found themselves helpless against their hit-and-run tactics. To many enemies, the Scythians seemed like phantoms, striking from nowhere and vanishing back into the endless horizon. What shocked outsiders most were their customs. According to Herodotus, Scythian warriors sometimes drank the blood of their first enemy slain in battle. Skulls of defeated foes were fashioned into drinking cups, a chilling symbol of victory and dominance. Archaeological finds have confirmed their warrior culture. Burials often contain weapons, armor, and horses sacrificed to accompany the dead. Tattoos found on preserved bodies show elaborate patterns of animals, deer, leopards, and mythical beasts etched permanently into skin. These designs were more than decoration. They carried meaning tied to identity, power, and the spiritual world. The Scythians also practiced unusual rituals. Ancient sources describe them inhaling grass smoke inside small tents to purify themselves or enter altered states. Archaeological digs have uncovered seeds and vessels that match these accounts. To their neighbors, such rituals seemed strange or barbaric, but to the Scythians, they were sacred connections to the divine. Death was treated with equal intensity. Chiefs were buried in enormous mounds called kurgans, along with sacrificed horses, servants, and treasures of gold. The Scythians were not merely warriors. They were also skilled artisans. Gold, jewelry, plaques, and weapons found in their tombs show astonishing craftsmanship. Intricate scenes of animals locked in combat, delicate patterns, and lifelike detail. Despite their nomadic life, they carried portable art that rivaled the treasures of great empires. This animal-style art spread widely, influencing neighboring cultures from Greece to Persia. In trade, the Scythians were crucial middlemen, linking east and west across the steppe. Goods, ideas, and technologies flowed along their routes, long before the Silk Road became famous. Still, it was their military power that made the greatest impression. The Scythians confounded empires as large as Persia. In the 6th century BCE, King Darius I of Persia launched a campaign against them, only to be frustrated as the Scythians avoided open battle, burned their own lands, and harassed his forces until he retreated. Even mighty Persia could not break them. Later, alliances with Greek city-states and conflicts with Macedonian successors show how central the Scythians were to the geopolitics of the ancient world. They were a people no empire could ignore. Yet, like many nomadic powers, the Scythians eventually faded. By the 3rd century BCE, pressure from other steppe tribes like the Sarmatians eroded their dominance. Some were absorbed, others displaced, their distinct culture fragmenting over time, but their legend endured. Greek myths spoke of Amazons' warrior women who may have been inspired by Scythian female fighters buried with weapons. Their tattoos, their golden art, their skull rituals, these details lived on in the imagination of later generations. Today, archaeology continues to reveal their world. Frozen tombs in Siberia have preserved clothing, tattoos, even flesh, providing glimpses of Scythians as individuals rather than just legends. From the gold treasures of Ukraine to the horse burials of Kazakhstan, each discovery reinforces how extraordinary these people were. For a culture without cities or writing, they left behind a record more vivid than many empires. The Scythians remind us that civilization is not defined by walls or palaces. Sometimes, it is written in movement, in art carried across saddlebags, in rituals performed beneath the open sky. They terrified their enemies, inspired myths, and carved their identity into both the land and the memory of history. This is number 7 on our list, the Comanche. Master horsemen, who built a feared empire across the American plains. Long before the United States expanded westward, the Great Plains were the domain of the Comanche. Emerging in the late 1600s, they were originally part of the Shoshone people of the Northern Rockies. But once they acquired horses from Spanish settlers, everything changed. The Comanche transformed themselves into unrivaled riders, able to hunt, raid, and fight with a mobility that stunned both native and European rivals. The horse was no longer just a tool, it became the very foundation of Comanche society. Comanche children were placed on horseback at an early age, learning to ride before they could walk steadily. By adolescence, they could fire arrows or lances with pinpoint accuracy at full gallop. Their ability to control horses, sometimes riding bareback and hanging off the sides during battle, made them nearly impossible to hit. A Comanche warrior could loose arrows faster than a soldier could reload a musket, creating a devastating advantage in skirmishes. To settlers and soldiers, their speed and precision seemed almost supernatural. Their dominance of the southern plains gave rise to what historians call the Conqueror territory, stretching from modern-day Colorado through Texas and into northern Mexico. From the 1700s to the mid-1300s, the Comanche ruled this vast region not as a centralized state, but as a confederation of bands bound together by culture, trade, and war. Their enemies, from Apache tribes to Mexican villagers and later American settlers, learned to fear the thunder of hooves on the horizon. The Comanche raided deep into Mexico, capturing livestock, taking captives, and striking terror in border towns that never knew when or where the next attack would fall. Life in Comanche camps reflected their reliance on mobility. They lived in tipis, which could be packed up quickly and moved with the herds. Buffalo provided food, clothing, and shelter, and their hunting skills were legendary. Unlike farming societies, the Comanche lived lightly on the land, following the rhythms of migration and weather. This mobility made them elusive opponents. Armies marching with wagons and supply lines could rarely catch them, and even when they did, the Comanche often struck and retreated before a decisive blow could be landed. If stories of tribes who defied empires and built their own power fascinate you, make sure to subscribe and follow along. Each episode in this series uncovers people whose histories are stranger and more dramatic than fiction. The Comanche were also shrewd traders. Horses captured in raids were exchanged for firearms, tools, and luxury goods. They acted as middlemen, moving trade between French, Spanish, and later American frontiers. But their ferocity in battle overshadowed their role as economic players. Tales spread of their raids, where captives might be integrated into the tribe, traded, or sometimes subjected to brutal treatment. To enemies, this brutality underscored the Comanche reputation as ruthless. To the Comanche themselves, it was survival asserting dominance in a world of constant competition. As the 19th century progressed, the balance began to shift. The United States expanded westward, bringing soldiers, forts, and settlers into Comanche territory. The invention of the revolver, and later repeating rifles, began to erode the advantage of bow over musket. Diseases like smallpox and cholera swept through Comanche bands, reducing their numbers. Perhaps most devastating was the destruction of the buffalo herds by commercial hunters in the mid-1800s. The animal that sustained their entire way of life was driven to near extinction in just a few decades. Despite fierce resistance, including decades of raiding and warfare, the Comanche could not withstand these combined pressures. Leaders like Quanah Parker, the son of a Comanche chief, and a white captive woman named Cynthia Ann Parker, became symbols of adaptation. Quanah eventually surrendered in 1875 and helped guide his people into reservation life, balancing tradition with survival in a changing world. Yet the Comanche legacy endures. Their mastery of the horse reshaped the history of North America. They built an empire without walls or palaces, held together by speed, skill, and fear. Their influence forced empires Spanish, Mexican, and American alike to reckon with them. Even today, The image of the mounted warrior galloping across the plains is inseparable from the Comanche story. The Comanche remind us that power can take many forms. For a time, they were not just survivors, but rulers of the plains, bending an entire region to their will. And so, the Comanche claim their place on this list. From their rise as horse lords to their fall under the weight of disease, rifles, and expansion, they remain one of the most formidable tribal peoples in history. This is number 6 on our list, the Vikings. Seafarers who combined raiding, trading, and myth into one unforgettable culture. From the late 8th century onward, the sight of a dragon-headed longship gliding out of the morning fog struck terror across Europe. The Vikings, hailing from Scandinavia, were not just warriors, but farmers, craftsmen, and explorers. What set them apart was their mastery of the sea. Their longships, sleek and shallow-drafted, could cross open oceans, yet also sail up rivers, bringing Norse raiders to the doorsteps of monasteries and cities that thought themselves safe. When Lindisfarne Abbey in England was sacked in 793 CE, chroniclers called it the beginning of the Viking Aegea period that would reshape Europe for centuries. The Viking reputation for violence was well earned. They struck monasteries and towns with sudden ferocity, looting treasures, burning buildings, and taking captives. Yet to reduce them to mere raiders misses the bigger picture. Vikings were also traders, connecting Scandinavia with markets as far as Constantinople and Baghdad. They carried furs, amber, and slaves southward, and returned with silver, silk, and spices. They were pragmatic, willing to plunder one day and bargain the next, depending on what brought the most reward. This mix of raiding and commerce blurred the line between pirate and merchant. Their mythology added another layer of intrigue. Norse sagas spoke of gods like Odin, the one-eyed seeker of wisdom, Thor, the thunderer with his mighty hammer, and Loki, the trickster who sowed chaos. Warriors believed that dying in battle could grant them entry to Valhalla, a hall where they would feast and fight forever. This belief in an afterlife of eternal struggle helped fuel their fearlessness in combat. To an enemy, it could seem as if the Vikings did not fear death at all. The Vikings also established settlements that became the roots of modern nations. They founded Dublin in Ireland, left their mark in northern England, and settled Normandy in France, its very name, derived from Northmen. In Eastern Europe, Viking traders known as Varangians navigated the great rivers, laying the foundations for what would become the Russian state. Their influence stretched from Newfoundland in North America, where Leif Erikson landed centuries before Columbus, to the glittering halls of Byzantium, where Norse warriors served as elite bodyguards in the Varangian Guard. Visually, one can imagine these scenes: longships slicing through icy seas, warriors in chainmail storming a monastery, markets buzzing with traders speaking in many tongues, and storytellers weaving sagas by firelight. The Vikings were not confined to a single role. They adapted to opportunity, whether through sword or silver. Despite their achievements, the Viking Age eventually faded. By the 11th century, stronger kingdoms across Europe developed better defenses. Fortified towns and standing armies blunted Viking raids. Conversion to Christianity changed their worldview, gradually replacing the old pagan myths with new beliefs. Scandinavian kings consolidated power, turning loose bands of raiders into centralized states. The wild age of the sea rovers gave way to monarchies that would join the European order rather than terrorize it. Yet the legacy of the Vikings endures. Their sagas preserve a record of courage, treachery, and exploration. Their ships remain marvels of engineering, capable of feats unmatched for their time. Their genetic and cultural impact spread widely from Scotland and Ireland to Russia and Normandy. Even today, Norse mythology thrives in popular culture, echoed in books, films, and television. The Vikings remind us that history is rarely simple. They were raiders, yes, but also settlers, storytellers, and global traders. They lived in a world where myth and reality blurred, where a warrior might drink from a looted chalice one day and trade silks the next. It is this duality, the balance of violence and vision, that makes their story so unforgettable. And so, the Vikings take their place on this list, not just as marauders of the seas, but as builders of a culture that blended brutality, artistry, and exploration. This is number 5 on our list, the Zulu. Under Shaka Zulu, they transformed from a small clan into a feared military power. In the early 19th century, the Zulu were one of many small Nguni-speaking clans scattered across southeastern Africa. Within just a few decades, they would rise to dominate the region, reshaping southern Africa's political and military landscape. At the center of this transformation was one man, Shaka Zulu. His leadership, brutal reforms, and relentless ambition turned the Zulu from a minor group into a kingdom whose name carried both awe and fear. Shaka was born around 1787, the illegitimate son of a Zulu chief. Raised partly in exile, he served as a warrior in the powerful Mthethwa Confederacy, where his talent for strategy and discipline stood out. When he eventually seized leadership of the Zulu around 1816, he introduced radical changes to warfare that would redefine battle in the region. His innovations were simple, yet devastatingly effective. The traditional throwing spear, or assegai, was replaced by a short stabbing spear known as the ikwala, designed for close combat. Warriors carried large cowhide shields and were drilled to fight in disciplined formations rather than loose skirmishes. The most famous was the horns of the buffalo tactic. The chest of the formation engaged the enemy head-on, while the horns encircled them from both sides, cutting off escape. Once trapped, opponents were crushed with ruthless efficiency. Shaka's insistence on relentless training, forced marches, and absolute obedience turned his regiments into a professional army unlike any seen in the region. The results were staggering. Small tribes and rival chiefs, who once held their ground with ease, found themselves annihilated. Within a few years, the Zulu kingdom expanded rapidly, absorbing or displacing countless neighboring groups. This period of upheaval, known as the Mafekan, saw massive migrations, wars, and disruptions across southern Africa. Entire societies were reshaped as Shaka's military machine rolled forward. For those who resisted, the Zulu reputation was terrifying. Battles often ended in slaughter, and survivors were rarely spared. For those who joined, the rewards were protection and a share in the kingdom's rising power. To visualize this era is to picture Zulu regiments arrayed in perfect formation, shields gleaming, spears poised, advancing with chants that shook the ground. The sight alone was enough to make enemies falter. Shaka demanded loyalty and instilled discipline with an iron hand, punishing disobedience brutally. Yet he also inspired deep devotion, his charisma binding his warriors to him as much as fear did. Shaka's reign was as short as it was transformative. By the late 1820s, his campaigns had created a vast Zulu kingdom, but his rule grew increasingly tyrannical. Paranoia and cruelty deepened after the death of his mother, leading to purges and erratic decisions. In 1828, Shaka was assassinated by his half-brothers, ending his rule after just over a decade. Yet, in that short span, he had carved the Zulu into a force that would endure long after his death. The Zulu kingdom continued to grow, and later kings would face colonial powers head-on. In 1879, the Zulu inflicted one of the most shocking defeats in colonial history at the Battle of Isandlwana, where thousands of warriors overwhelmed a modern British force, armed with rifles and artillery. The victory stunned Europe, proving that even the might of an empire could be humbled by disciplined indigenous fighters. Although the British ultimately triumphed after reinforcements, the Zulu had left an indelible mark on history. Today, the Zulu remain the largest ethnic group in South Africa, their culture alive in language, music, and traditions. Shaka himself is remembered as both a brutal conqueror and a nation-builder, his story a complex blend of admiration and fear. Statues and monuments celebrate him, while oral traditions keep his legacy alive. His military innovations echo in history as a reminder of how quickly one man's vision can reshape an entire region. The Zulu story is one of transformation, from obscurity to dominance, from scattered clans to a kingdom powerful enough to shake empires. They remind us that history is not only written in palaces and capitals, but also on open plains, where discipline, courage, and strategy can build an empire. And so, the Zulu take their place on this list not just as warriors of legend, but as a people whose rise under Shaka Zulu altered the course of southern Africa. This is number 4 on our list, the Mongols. From herding on the steppe to conquering the largest land empire in history. For centuries, the great Eurasian steppe was home to scattered nomadic clans. They lived in felt-covered yurts, herded sheep and horses, and moved with the seasons. Few could have imagined that from these wandering tribes would rise a force that would shake the world. Yet, in the early 13th century, under the leadership of Genghis Khan, the Mongols exploded outward from Mongolia to build an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. No tribal people before us since has ever transformed so quickly from obscurity to global dominance. The Mongols' strength lay in their mastery of the horse and the bow. From childhood, boys learned to ride at full gallop and fire arrows with deadly accuracy. Their composite bows, made from wood, horn, and sinew, could penetrate armor at long distances. A Mongol army could move faster than any opponent, covering up to 100 miles in a day. Their tactics were brilliant. Feigned retreats lured enemies into ambushes, while coordinated divisions struck from multiple directions. Against such speed and deception, heavy infantry and slow-moving knights stood little chance. But the Mongols were more than skilled riders, they were organized. Genghis Khan imposed a strict system of discipline and merit. Tribes that once quarreled were reorganized into units that mixed different clans, ensuring loyalty was to the empire, not just family. Commanders rose, based on ability rather than birth, an innovation that gave the Mongols an edge over more rigid societies. Even deserters were hunted down mercilessly, ensuring obedience. The results were astonishing. One campaign after another fell before them. Northern China's great cities, the Islamic heartlands of Central Asia, the steppes of Russia, even Hungary and Poland all felt the thunder of Mongol hooves. In their wake, entire cities were annihilated. Chroniclers spoke of pyramids of skulls erected as warnings. Resistance was met with merciless slaughter, while those who surrendered quickly often survived and were absorbed into the Mongol system. The brutality of their conquests became legendary, spreading fear long before their armies arrived. And yet, the Mongols were not only destroyers, they were also builders. Once territories were conquered, the empire imposed order across its vast domains. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, opened trade routes from China to Europe. Merchants, scholars, and travelers moved across Eurasia with unprecedented freedom. The Silk Road flourished under their protection, spreading goods, ideas, and technologies. Paper, gunpowder, and printing traveled westward. European glassware and silver moved east. Even disease moved more freely. The Black Death likely spread to Europe along routes secured by Mongol patrols. Genghis Khan himself died in 1227, but his successors carried the empire further. His grandson, Kublai Khan, conquered the Song dynasty and established the Yuan dynasty in China, ruling from Beijing. Another branch pushed into the Middle East, clashing with the Mamluks and destroying Baghdad in 1258, an event that ended the Islamic Golden Age. By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history, a patchwork of khanates ruling over tens of millions of people. Despite their power, the Mongols' empire eventually fractured. Succession disputes, rebellions, and the sheer vastness of their territory made unity impossible. By the 14th century, the empire had split into 4 major khanates. Yet their influence endured. Russia's political development was shaped under Mongol domination. China absorbed Mongol rulers and institutions into its own dynasties. And Europe's first real exposure to the wider world came through travelers like Marco Polo, who carried tales of Mongol courts back to Venice. The Mongols remain a paradox. They are remembered as ruthless destroyers who leveled entire cities, yet also as connectors who linked the farthest ends of Eurasia. Their empire was built on horseback, sustained by terror, but also opened pathways that helped shape the modern world. And so, the Mongols take their place on this list not just as conquerors, but as a reminder of how quickly a tribal society could rise to global power. This is number 3 on our list, the Aztecs. A mighty empire remembered for breathtaking achievements and blood-soaked rituals. In the early 14th century, a wandering people known as the Mexica settled on a swampy island in the Valley of Mexico. Legend says their god Huitzilopochtli guided them to a Sanan eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. There they built Tenochtitlan, a city that would rise from the marshes into one of the greatest urban centers of the pre-Columbian world. Within just 2 centuries, the Aztecs transformed from nomads to rulers of an empire that stretched across central Mexico, commanding millions of subjects and dazzling even their enemies with the scale of their achievements. Tenochtitlan itself was a marvel. Built on a series of artificial islands called chinampas, it stood as a city of canals, causeways, and towering temples. At its height, it may have housed 200,000 people, making it larger than most European capitals of the time. Visitors described bustling marketplaces filled with goods from across the empire: cacao, jade, feathers, obsidian blades, and exotic animals. Aqueducts carried fresh water into the city, while intricate dikes controlled flooding. At the city's heart stood the Templo Mayor, a massive pyramid where the gods of war and rain were honored. From the air today, the ruins seem small. But to the conquistadors arriving in 1519, Tenochtitlan looked like a vision of Venice transplanted to the New World. The empire was held together by warfare, tribute, and ritual. Each conquered city was required to provide goods, food, textiles, luxury items, and captives. War was not just about expanding territory, it was also about feeding the religious system. The Aztecs believed the sun itself required nourishment in the form of human blood and hearts. Thus, ritual sacrifice stood at the center of their worldview. Prisoners captured in flower wars were paraded up temple steps, laid on stone altars, and offered to the gods in ceremonies that horrified outsiders but, to the Aztecs, ensured cosmic balance. These sacrifices were not random cruelty, they were deeply tied to Aztec cosmology. Their myths taught that the world had been destroyed and remade multiple times, and only through sacrifice could the fifth and current sun continue to rise. To them, death and sacrifice was an honor, a pathway to accompany the gods. This blending of awe-inspiring achievements and terrifying rituals is what makes the Aztecs so unforgettable. The Aztec military machine was relentless. Warriors were trained from boyhood, rewarded for capturing enemies alive rather than simply killing them. Elite warrior orders like the Jaguar and Eagle warriors wore elaborate costumes, their very presence intended to terrify opponents. Expansion brought wealth, but also resentment, as subjugated peoples bore the heavy weight of tribute and the constant threat of losing their young men to sacrifice. It was this resentment that would later play a decisive role in the empire's downfall. When and his band of Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519, they were few in number. But they carried steel, guns, horses, and, most devastatingly, disease. Smallpox would ravage the empire within years. Also forged alliances with tribes long oppressed by the Aztecs, most notably the Tlaxcalans, who provided tens of thousands of fighters. The result was a conquest in which Spanish weapons mattered less than native resentment and epidemic disease. By 1521, Tenochtitlan lay in ruins, its temples burned, its canals clogged with the dead. Yet, even in defeat, the Aztecs left a legacy that cannot be erased. Their language, Nahuatl, survives in modern Mexico, embedded in words like chocolate, tomato, and avocado. Their art and architecture remain symbols of identity and pride. Archaeological digs continue to reveal treasures of gold, turquoise, and stone, showing a culture of extraordinary sophistication. Today, the image of the eagle on the cactus still sits at the center of the Mexican flag, a reminder that the Mexican vision never truly died. The Aztecs remind us that civilizations are rarely simple. They were builders of one of the world's most impressive cities, engineers of floating gardens, creators of dazzling art and practitioners of rituals that shocked both their neighbors and the Europeans who chronicled them. Their greatness and their brutality were two sides of the same coin, inseparable in the story they left behind. And so, the Aztecs take their place on this list. Their empire both admired and condemned, their legacy etched into the history of the Americas. This is number 2 on our list, the Amazons. Legendary warrior women who may not have been just myth after all. For centuries, Greek poets and historians spoke of a society of women warriors living on the edges of the known world. They were called the Amazons, fierce, independent, and equal to men in battle. To the Greeks, the idea was both terrifying and fascinating. In their stories, Amazons clashed with heroes like Achilles, Heracles, and Theseus, often portrayed as both noble adversaries and symbols of a world turned upside down. On painted pottery and carved friezes, warriors with bows, spears, and trousers, the dress of barbarians faced off against armored Greek hoplites. But was this all just myth, or did a real culture inspire the legends? The answer may lie far from Greece, across the steppes of Eurasia. Archaeological discoveries in recent decades have revealed burial mounds of Scythian and Sarmatian nomads horse-riding peoples, who roamed from Ukraine to Central Asia. Among the skeletons were women, interred with weapons, bows, quivers full of arrows, spears, even armor. Many showed signs of battle injuries, suggesting these were not ceremonial burials, but genuine fighters. Genetic and osteological studies have confirmed that up to a third of some Scythian warrior graves belonged to women. These finds align uncannily with the Greek image of Amazon warriors living beyond the Black Sea. The Amazons, then, may not have been an invention, but a distorted reflection of encounters between Greeks and steppe nomads. Two Greek men who viewed war as a male domain and women as confined to the household. The sight of women riding, fighting, and wielding power must have been shocking. In myth, Amazons lived apart from men, taking them only for procreation, raising only daughters, and discarding or exiling their sons. Whether this reflects reality is doubtful, but, as a story, it underscored how radically different these women seemed to the patriarchal Greek world. Their supposed homeland shifted, depending on the source. Herodotus placed them among the Scythians, saying captured Amazons intermarried with nomadic men, creating a new tribe known as the Sauromatei. Others placed them near the Caucasus, or along the Thermodon River in Anatolia. Wherever their geography wandered, the essence remained. A people defined by women in arms, reversing the social order. Beyond myth, the Amazon archetype left a lasting cultural impact. In Greek art, they often appear as the other, dressed in Eastern garb, fighting with bows rather than spears, their defeat a symbolic reaffirmation of Greek dominance. Yet the Greeks also admired their courage, weaving them into epics alongside the greatest heroes. Later writers in Rome carried the tradition forward, even as stories grew more exaggerated. By the Middle Ages, tales of warrior women had traveled across continents, blending into folklore from Persia to China. Archaeology continues to add layers to the story. In burial mounds across Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine, excavations have uncovered women buried with quivers, saddles, and horses. Some were teenagers, others adults in their 30s, suggesting female participation in warfare was not rare, but an integrated part of nomadic life. Combined with evidence that Scythian society offered women more mobility and freedom than agricultural neighbors, the idea of women fighting alongside men no longer seems far-fetched. The Amazon myth also resonates because it challenges deep assumptions. To the Greeks, they represented inversion women as warriors, men as domestic, society reversed. To modern eyes, they suggest something else, that gender roles in history were more fluid than often assumed, and that entire societies may have accepted women in positions of martial power. In this sense, the Amazons stand at the crossroads of legend and history, their story shaped by both fact and imagination. Even today, their name lives on. The world's largest river, the Amazon, was named after reports of female warriors encountered by Spanish explorers in South America. Modern popular culture has embraced them too, from Wonder Woman's The Masira to countless novels and films. The archetype of the warrior woman, both alluring and fearsome, has proved impossible to forget. The Amazons remind us that myth often grows from kernels of truth. Behind the stories of a matriarchal warrior nation lies the reality of Scythian women buried with bows and scars from battle. They may not have lived exactly as the Greeks imagined, but they existed in ways that blurred the line between fable and fact. And so, the Amazons take their place on this list, not only as symbols of legend, but as living proof that women once fought, ruled, and terrified their enemies across the steppe. This is number 1 on our list: the Spartans. A people who trained boys from childhood for war and built a society around military perfection. In ancient Greece, most city-states balanced politics, trade, and culture. Athens boasted philosophers, artists, and a navy that ruled the seas. But Sparta chose a different path. Nestled in the Peloponnesus, it became a society built almost entirely around war. To outsiders, the Spartans were both admired and feared, a people who sacrificed comfort, freedom, and even family bonds for the singular pursuit of military strength. Spartan boys entered the agoge, a brutal state-run training system, at the age of 7. Torn from their families, they were forged into warriors through hardship. They learned discipline, endurance, and cunning. Food was deliberately scarce to force them to steal, but if caught, punishment was severe, not for theft itself, but for failing to do it skillfully. They marched barefoot, slept on reeds, and endured cold without complaint. By adolescence, they trained in combat daily, mastering the shield, spear, and sword. The result was not just soldiers, but a culture where obedience and sacrifice to the state defined manhood. Women in Sparta lived very differently from their counterparts in Athens. While Athenian women were confined to the household, Spartan women trained in athletics, owned land, and managed estates while men were away at war. Their role was not equality in a modern sense, but was vital to sustaining a militarized society. Strong women, it was believed, would bear strong sons. This balanced men as warriors, women as managers, helped Sparta endure. The Spartan army became legendary for its discipline. Warriors fought in the phalanx, a formation of overlapping shields and spears that created an impenetrable wall. Unlike other armies, which might break under pressure, Spartans were drilled to hold their ground at all costs. Their reputation was immortalized at Thermopylae in 480 BCE, when King Leonidas and 300 Spartans, along with several thousand allies, held off the vast Persian army of Xerxes for 3 days. Though they were eventually annihilated, their stand became a symbol of courage against impossible odds. Yet the reality of Spartan life was far harsher than the legend. The society depended on a massive enslaved population known as helots, who worked the land and provided food. These helots outnumbered Spartans many times over, and fear of revolt shaped the militarization of Spartan society as much as the threat of foreign enemies. Each year, Sparta even declared ritual war on the helots, allowing young warriors to kill them without religious penalty. For all its glory, Spartan strength was built on a foundation of oppression. If you've enjoyed this journey through history's most astonishing peoples, make sure to subscribe and follow along. Each episode reveals how cultures both famous and forgotten defied expectations and left legacies that still echo today. Spartan culture was also striking in what it rejected. Unlike Athens, Sparta produced no great philosophers, playwrights, or monumental architecture. Its strength lay not in ideas or art, but in discipline and fear. Outsiders often admired Spartan warriors, but criticized their society as narrow and joyless. When Theban and Athenian soldiers finally broke Spartan dominance in the 4th century BCE, the cracks in this system were clear. A society that sacrificed everything for war proved brittle when faced with changing times. Still, the Spartan image has endured for over 2 millennia. From Plutarch's writings to modern films, the story of 300 warriors facing overwhelming odds continues to inspire. Their laconic wit, short, sharp sayings like "come and take them" when ordered to surrender their weapons, became as legendary as their deeds. The Spartan brand of courage, discipline, and sacrifice has become shorthand for resilience under fire. The Spartans remind us that perfection often comes at a cost. Their society produced unmatched warriors, but only by demanding total submission from its citizens and exploiting the labor of others. They embody the paradox of history, greatness built on foundations that today we would find unacceptable. Yet their legend continues, a reminder of how stories of courage can outlive the complex realities behind them. And so, the Spartans take the final place on this list. From the Sentinelese, hidden in isolation, to the Spartans, forged in discipline. We've traveled across continents and centuries, exploring peoples whose ways of life defy belief. Some vanished, others endured, but all left marks that history cannot erase. These stories remind us that humanity has never followed a single path. Our diversity of cultures, choices, and extremes is what makes the past so astonishing.